Welcome back to the Coptimizer podcast. Appreciate everyone tuning in and spending some of your valuable time with us. Today, you will not be disappointed. We have another fantastic guest. Today, we have Patrick Houlahan, who is the founder and CEO of Strategic Leadership Consultants, and maybe most notably in his past life, Top Gun fighter pilot. He's done a lot of amazing things over his career. And there are some great leadership lessons that I think we're going to pick up today. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Patrick.
Well, good morning, Patrick. We might confuse the audience a little bit because we're both Patricks, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And also, kind of the continuing support of our men and women in uniform, and not necessarily the fatigues that are going across the seas, but the ones that are out on the streets every day, making sure that me and my family are safe. So just start off with an early thank you for their service and to their families as well, that support them. So it does mean a lot of people back the blue. So,
well, thank you very much. And those thanks go right back at you. Appreciate not only everything that you've done over your career, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we move through the podcast here, but also for your willingness to take those lessons learned where you trained and performed at the very highest level as a pilot, and now all those lessons, you take them and you're willing to share those with others to help others improve their performance. And really, that's what our show is about: is how do we learn from the best? How do we take the best lessons that are available to us, and how do we apply them to make ourselves a little bit better today than we were yesterday? Incremental growth, but the concept of always moving forward, and when we fail, hopefully we fall on our face and not on our rear ends.
Right. So, well, great way to put it.
Well, I wish I could say that was mine, but it wasn't.
I wish I could say that's how I always fail too, moving forward, not backwards. So,
oh yeah, right before we went on the air here, I was telling you about one of my the experiences where I failed and fell backwards on that one. But in any case, maybe we'll get to that later. But
yeah, that's a story for another day. We'll keep that one at the bar.
Well, if you don't mind, maybe take us through some of your background and what has led you to where you are today.
It's a dangerous thing to ask a fighter pilot to talk about themselves, because they might just keep going.
Oh, you're talking to a chief here, so chiefs are the same way, right?
It might be the same way, right? So I guess we'll just start at the beginning. How do I end up where I am? How did I end up Top Gun as a fighter pilot? I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Jackson, Mississippi, and then went to high school in Kansas City. So average childhood, played the creek, rode bikes, broke stuff, got stitches, pissed my mom off a lot because I would leave stringers of fish in the sink and say, "Can you clean these for dinner?" And then I'd go out and play. So nothing unusual, right? I did end up going to college at the Citadel, the military college of South Carolina. So, maybe that's a foretelling of where I was going to end up eventually. But honestly, I wanted to play football professionally. I wanted to be a vet, and flying airplanes in the Marine Corps was actually my third choice. The other two didn't work out. I'm not tall enough or fast enough. And when I got to some of the biology and chemistry courses, I'm like, I love animals, but I'm not doing that. So I took the path of least resistance, which was the Marine Corps and airplanes, which I guess I set a low bar, right? But went in actually in the Marine Corps was going to be either an infantry officer or be a tank driver. Those were the top two choices, but I ended up picking up a flight slot at the very beginning along the way, just based on performance and the fact that I'd already passed all those tests, and off the flight school I went. So spent 12 years on active duty, and during that time, managed to get all the way up to Top Gun, became an instructor pilot, We were teaching new aircrew how to fly the F-18, and in some cases, 3 weeks later, they were in combat. And then when I left, I still stayed in the reserve, so I was there for another 15 years. They kept giving me keys to an airplane, so I kept showing up to work. Right, that kind of makes it easy. Deployed 2 more times, once to Iraq in 2009, and then my third deployment over to Japan and Korea in 2013. But in the meantime, I was out in the civilian world, the business world, so I had a foot on both sides. One day I was a Marine in uniform. The next day I was Patrick Houlahan, either consultant or director of business development or executive consultant, things of that nature. And then eventually I decided I'm going to do my own thing, hung up my own shingle, and here I am teaching organizations how to build inspired, compassionate, mission-driven leaders.
Well, I have to go back when you said right from the beginning, when you're out as a kid running around catching fish, dropping them in the sink for your mom. I think that's awesome. And getting injured. I don't know if you follow Super 70 Sports on Twitter, if you're even on Twitter, but I think he is the funniest thing on Twitter. And I try to stick to just the things that crack me up. But he has this tweet out there where it shows, I don't know if you remember the old Schwinns with the monkey bars and the big seat.
The banana seats?
The banana seats.
I had a Huffy. It was a Buckaroo Huffy with the banana seat that I rode forever, and finally figured out as I got bigger, I could wheelie that thing all the way down the street. Oh, by the way, no helmets. And that was after drinking out of the garden hose. So yeah, I'm sorry, I just stole your story, Patrick.
No, it's awesome. All those things are so, and it really does bring me back to my childhood. But there is one where he shows this kid just launching off of a ramp, and there's a bunch of little kids all wearing like bell-bottom jeans and stuff in the background, and they're watching him fly through the air. And he has a little profanity on there, which maybe I won't share on the podcast, but it really does. It takes you back, and so when you say things like that, it does not surprise me that you wind up becoming a Top Gun fighter pilot, right? It makes perfect sense. Your future maybe was being foretold long before you entered the Citadel.
Well, also both my parents had been Marines, so there was some influence about the Marine Corps. They weren't in when I was alive, but yeah. So that kind of helps steer you that way. It's so funny you mentioned that kid jumping off a ramp. So my good friend, my childhood friend, who did Boy Scouts together, same school, football, the whole 9 yards. He's actually chief of police over in Addison, Texas, right now. He was a Marine reservist, so yeah, I broke his sister's bike jumping off a ramp like that, crushed the rims. His dad was not happy. I don't think I got a beating, but I think he got really close for setting that up. So I'll have to look up that podcast. That sounds something that'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, Super 70 Sports on Twitter. Just look it up. It's great. And you'll just block out about an hour because you're going to need to get caught up, and you can just run through and catch all the good things. But I digress. So one of the other things that we had chatted about briefly, when I was enlisted in the Air Force right out of high school, I was stationed for the first few years in Charleston, South Carolina. So very familiar with the Citadel. We used to hang out with some folks from the Citadel from time to time. And that, without spending too much time chatting about it, what a like unique school and kind of unique history around the Citadel. So did you play football at the Citadel?
I did the first couple of years. Then I decided I actually did need to study. So, and it's just, it was one of those, it's kind of the Rudy, right? I'm going to play for Notre Dame. I just wanted to play, and it just wasn't going to happen. So that kind of, not that here I am telling all your listeners I'm completely unathletic, but I actually played rugby in high school and kept playing at the Citadel too. And that was, I really enjoyed that. So I kind of flipped over and started doing that, and actually did that for another 20 years, which is a great sport. Not that we're going to get into talking about rugby, that there is so much you can learn in terms of teamwork and dedication and responsibility, because it is a team sport, and thinking under pressure. That sport is one of that and flying air combat, ACM, BFM, like you'd see in the Top Gun movie, are the two things that mentally and physically exhausted me. Because it's who can think the clearest when you're the most beat up and the tiredest, I guess is a word. I just made it up. But whoever is the most tired, whoever can think the clearest at that point and make the right decisions and be in the right place is going to win.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And by the way, one of the best leadership books ever written was about rugby, right? About the All Blacks and their long winning streak, and really the methodology behind their continued success.
It's kind of a Bill Belichick thing, right? Everybody talk to any Patriot player and they go, yeah, you just got to trust the system. Got to trust the process. That's it. Trust the process. So
trust the process. So, which brings up a very pertinent question then. So when you're a fighter pilot and you're preparing for these combat flights that you know are going to be exhausting, what's the preparation, not just physically but maybe mentally, that goes into your training?
That's a good question. And it's funny, I just said you trust the process. The process is there. So the preparation is just doing things the right way and doing it the right way every time. And whether you're in combat or on a training mission back in the States, just going out to do some, whatever it is, it's the same process. We don't change anything. Sometimes I get asked in the business world, well, when you're training and the stakes aren't that high. And then when you go to combat, okay, they're exceedingly high. So how does that really compare? Because whenever I go to work, I'm not in a life or death situation, although police officers you might be, but it's just, you develop a process, you follow it, you brief the same way, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. Whether you're going to go kick in a door or simply drive around that day on patrol, it's the same process every single time. And that leaves you prepared when things change. I mean, that's the whole deal, is can I come up with the same results or better, no matter how the conditions have changed that I'm facing? And when those things change, especially in the military or in law enforcement, it can change and escalate very quickly, right? So can I still get to the target? Can I still have the same goal no matter what's happening around me?
And if we're going to make a Top Gun reference, can I do it without passing out when the G's get too high, right?
Exactly.
And did you ever have to put a tone on someone to pull them back out, pull them from the depths?
No, never toned anybody. Probably could have toned myself a couple times. That's a little bit of Hollywood, but it absolutely makes sense, because that is something I don't think I've ever trained to lock somebody up to set off their raw gear so they'll wake up from a G-lock episode, but you definitely yell at them because the hearing is one of the last things that go. So you can, try to bring somebody or help them come back to reality or wake back up. But I guess the tone thing works.
Well, I can say the closest I've ever come to that is on a roller coaster.
Yeah. There are some roller coasters that'll get you close.
Yeah, there's one down at Universal Studios, the one that I can't remember the name of it, but it goes straight up and they tell you not to raise your hands. So of course I'm with my one of my sons who's in high school, and I'm like, yeah, if they tell you not to raise your hands, then it's going to be more fun to raise your hands.
Right.
And what I didn't know is they have the video recording that you can get after you're done. And sure enough, it takes you straight up and then straight down. And I raised my hands, and that's the closest I've ever come to blacking out. I everything started to narrow in. I was getting that visual and auditory exclusion. I could feel the world closing in, and then we hit the bottom, and I was able to snap out of it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
you start to
that was
gray out. Your vision's just smaller, smaller, smaller.
yeah. And so, in terms of preparation, I think we all probably have the same expressions at times, but in policing, one of the things that we would try to focus on is that complacency kills. That you do have to treat every day as if the risk, today is going to be the day when you're putting on your uniform and you're getting ready for work. And there's data that would suggest that your heart rate automatically increases. Dr. Gilmartin Kevin Gilmartin has written extensively about this, but you move from that normal state into a state of hypervigilance. Just from putting the uniform on, because your body, your mentally, your mind knows where the body is going, and it takes you there in advance to prepare you. And so having a good routine is very critical to long-term success, and being disciplined in sticking with your routine. So here's a question: as a pilot, what are the physical fitness requirements? And I'm sure you go through annual, or if not more frequent, physical screenings to ensure that you have the physical capacity to fly these very, very expensive aircraft.
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned putting the uniform on and the heart rate goes up, and the science and the data behind that. What's also interesting is having a routine. I think this is just me talking, so anybody out there could call BS on this, but having a routine can lower that heart rate. I mean, if you think about it, just intuitively, it's the same routine. I'm into the rhythm, and therefore I'm not amped up because things aren't coming at me from 500 different things and I've expected it. In terms of what's required physically, the Naval Air Medical Institute is very good about finding very obscure things in people and canceling them out of flight school. Well, to answer the question, we all got to be 6'2", 210 with chiseled abs if you go to Top Gun, right? I would like to think that's how I looked and how I still look. But the physical requirements, the science and data behind that's pretty extensive, going back to the 40s and 50s and 60s when they really got into it. You just basically got to be in shape, right? Got to take care of yourself. Things that affect, and since we were talking about graying out and G-lock, things like alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, lack of sleep, everything that we know is bad for us are things that are not good for you if you're going to be in the airplane. That is not to say that on a Friday night when the weekend is approaching or there that we don't go out and have a couple of beers and have a good time, but in excess just really drives all that down. So your physical health really does affect your mental health as well. So we try to make a commitment to either schedule time, find time to make sure that is a focus. Just not going to the pistol range or getting in the books. You got to take care of your health. And even if it's 30 minutes is better than nothing. Even if it's just dropping on the floor and doing a bunch of push-ups real quick, it's something, and that helps out.
Well, you're speaking to my soul now. And I'd like to say that I was one of these people that knew fitness was important from day one, but as a young enlisted airman, I had a lot of fun. We had kind of had that theme: work hard, play hard. We were not flying aircraft, so
but you're fixing them.
Yeah, well, we were there.
The airplanes don't fly without the airmen and Marines and sailors who put them back together.
Yeah, I was security police, so I guarded the aircraft, and then I did have the opportunity to we called them MSTs, mission support team. So Charleston had they were a military airlift command, what they used to call MAC, and so they used to fly embassy support missions around the world. So and a lot of people forget this, but in the mid to late 80s, there was a significant terrorism threat in Europe. Places like Ramstein and Germany and other places that experienced bombings, and U.S. military were targets for a lot of those things. So they used to take a couple of security police officers and put them on airplanes. And so it was, fortunately for us, there was not a whole lot that we had to do on those missions, but, and I joke about it now, but back then, I was 20 years old and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. The reality of it, when you're landing in a foreign land, in an airstrip somewhere in the middle of Africa, and your plane gets surrounded by locals carrying AK-47s, you're probably not, two people with a couple of rifles aren't going to be able to do much, but it did provide a good opportunity to travel and do a lot of cool things. But I digress. I have a tendency to do this. See, that's the chief in me. I start telling stories. So let's change gears just a minute. And I want to come back to one of those stories though, because it is kind of funny. But I'll come back to it later because I think there'll be a more appropriate time to chat about it. So you take all this experience that you have, not only as a pilot yourself, but as a trainer, where you're training other pilots, and you're taking those lessons learned and applying them for the future. So I know that you're one of our keynote presenters coming up at the Axon TaserCon conference in Las Vegas in January. So for folks listening, if you're interested in seeing Patrick in person, I would encourage you to jump on and get signed up to come out to that conference. It's going to be a pretty cool conference, and I'm looking forward to being out there with Axon Coaching. So it should be good. But I digress. So
no, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm excited and feel very fortunate to be part of that and to have been invited to be part of that. I think it's going to be a great conference. I think it's a great way to interact and with our men and women who wear the uniform in law enforcement. I'm not a police officer. I will never claim to be, and I won't even claim that some of my experiences are directly applicable. But sometimes it's a benefit as well, right? We both have worn uniforms, and part of that is I have some inkling, but I don't know. So teach me. Right. So that's one of the coolest things I have found when I'm, what is that exactly like? And our experiences, maybe they'll line up 1-to-1, but they're not off by that much, especially when it comes to processes or leadership or training or developing people or how to handle high risk or high pressure situations. It's just a different angle. And I think I guess that's one of the reasons why they're bringing me in, is that it's parallel but not the same. And I'm happy to be able to go out there and do that and hopefully provide something that individuals can take away, and improve their law enforcement practice, if you will, but also what they do in their personal lives sometimes. A lot of things that the lessons I talk about transcend, they carry over from what I picked up along the way.
Well, it all matters. And you can't separate different parts of your life, and that's just in anyone that thinks that they can, you're living an illusion. If you don't have a solid routine and a solid home life outside of work, it's going to impact work. And if you're not managing work well, it's going to impact your home life, and that on a lot of different levels. But I think one of the things that I really like about the premise of this conference and others is that we're in law enforcement. I think now more than ever, we're really starting to understand that it's not that training has not been important, because training has always been our lifeblood. But what we're really beginning to understand is that we have to train the whole person, because you can take the greatest technology that's out there, right? And I'll make an analogy for a Top Gun pilot. You can build the best aircraft in the world, but currently still, right, for the foreseeable future, it still takes a pilot to fly and make the best use of that equipment.
Right.
And in policing, it's no different. You there are rules, there are regulations. It does, there's 1,000 different guns or types of guns you can carry. There's a lot of different types of equipment, a lot of competition when it comes to that type of material support that you need. But in the end, it's the officer behind the badge that's making the decision that makes everything else go. And
Patrick, I think a very astute point there about the home life, and yeah, you can have all the technology, but from a leadership perspective, you have to be fully vested in your team's professional and personal development. And a lot of times that's pulling someone into a room, closing the door, and asking them, having that kind of conversation. What do you want to do in law enforcement? What is your focus? What is your future? What type of schools or training do you want? And oh, by the way, how are things at home? People tend to stamp around, and maybe there's some HR danger zones here, fine. But to really, one of the leadership principles is know your Marines and look out for their welfare. And out of the 14 leadership traits and 11 leadership principles, that was the one that I hung my hat on, because that was the one that was the most important. Knowing my people, looking out for their welfare, making sure they're taken care of, making sure that personally and professionally they're advancing. And all of that shows that you care. And as a leader, the most important thing I think you could do is genuinely care about your people, about your teams, and set them up for success. And if you do that, they tend to take things, not that police officers don't take things seriously, but the classes, and sometimes some of those classes that you take, you're like, really, we got to do this again, this annual requirement junk. But they tend to pay attention. They make the right decisions. They do the right things. They show up to work, and they're professional. And that comes from the top. And every leader that I've ever known, every teacher, coach, all the ones that I remember are the ones that cared. And I think that's a significant thing to take away, is that you have to genuinely care. And sometimes the regulations or the things that the city or county or state maybe, okay, that's all fine. We'll cross those T's and dot those I's, but I'm going to spend time and really caring and asking about my people. And look, sometimes they might need a day off. Sometimes they might need this. Sometimes they're motivated. They want to go to school or get further training, and they just can't get there. And they need the leader to make the sacrifice to get them there sometimes. So I think that's a very important point.
Yeah, so much to discuss just in that alone. And
that we'll be here for another 3 hours having that discussion.
Yeah. Well, but it's also critical. And so for the listener, maybe for the leader that's out there right now, maybe it's someone that's looking to move into a leadership position, or somebody that's there now. When you're in that position, you're trying to manage all the expectations can be very difficult. And what makes it really challenging in today's environment is that we're in, what I call a crisis. We're in a crisis where we cannot recruit and retain enough people. We're just not bringing enough new police officers or new lifeblood into the profession. And part of the problem is that inside of our profession, really in the last 5 to 6 years in particular, we've lost a little bit of the promotion from inside of the profession, where this, it used to be a very legacy oriented profession. My grandfather was a police officer. My dad was an officer. So, this is something I'm going to do, or, a close family or friend. And it was promoted from within. But we're kind of in this challenging space right now, where we're not necessarily seeing as much of that, where people inside the profession are I think, feeling a little beat down, a little worn out, a little stressed out. And they're not, they're like, look, this is tough on me. I wouldn't, I can't in good conscience ask someone else to step into the breach and do the same things, because I know the impact and the toll it's having on me. And it's easy to kind of get stuck in that spot. It's easy to kind of tell yourself, well, that's the right thing to do. But then when you look back on it, you're like, well, no, it's not the right thing to do, because our children, our children's children need good policing. They need professionals, and they need, quite frankly, people that are willing to sacrifice of themselves to ensure a better future for their own children. And I know that's a lot. So when it comes down to making sure that you're taking care of your people, I also think that there's an element there where I really want chiefs in particular, or upper administration and police departments, to really think about, is that in order to help others, you got to help yourself first. And I'll use the analogy. I've used this a few times, but right when you're on the airplane that's going down and the oxygen mask drop, what's the first thing they always tell you? It's
put it on yourself first.
Put it on yourself.
Yeah,
but because you can't help anybody if you can't help yourself first. So I think there's maybe maybe to, I guess, play on what you're saying there, is that when you take care of yourself and you lead by example, and you show people, look, you can have a decent nutrition plan, you can manage sleep, even with a tough work schedule, even with that balance that you're trying to seek when you're working nights and you have a family of young kids, and your spouse is working a different shift. All of these things they're manageable, they're doable. But I would say that, of course, at times we're not always great at it, but when you can keep that focus over the long term, then that kind of goes back to what we first talked about, is that you're going to be physically prepared to be able to handle the stresses that come, but that physical preparation, again, supports the emotional and the mental preparation and the balance. So it's a long way of saying, leaders, I think, need to take care of their people. They need to take care of themselves. And sometimes taking care of your people means providing the right resources to them,
right.
That allows them to do that.
Well, it also means demonstrating too. You're talking about taking the chiefs and the leaders taking care of themselves, physically, preparation, resources. The thing that it's a constant struggle is the mental health aspect too. I mean, your troops, your Marines, your people, your officers, they watch, right? And a lot of it is that what you say, it's what you do. And there's always been this stigma, and we have been working really hard on the military side, that, look, if you need to go talk to somebody because of an experience of what's going on, go talk to somebody. And you start with your leadership. And then if you need to go see a mental health professional, you could go that route, or you can go directly there. And there is no stigmatism to it anymore, or there shouldn't be. I think we tend to put that on ourselves, that I can handle this. I can handle this. I'm a Marine. I'm a police officer. This is my job. I'm supposed to work the shifts. I'm supposed to be able to deal with the things that I see and I experience. And, I don't want people to make fun of me because something bothered me and I got to go talk to someone. So I'm just going to swallow it and put it away. And I'm going to put it away, and I'm going to put it away. And eventually you can't put it away. The bucket gets full and things start falling out. And the things that start falling out are the things that shouldn't, oftentimes, right? So from a leadership standpoint, one of the best ways you can take care of your people is to model the correct behaviors. And if that means you tell your teams that once a week or twice or once every other week, you're going to talk to one of the mental health professionals for no other reason, just to clear the air and get things off your chest, that demonstration opens the door for that young patrolman or patrolwoman to sit there and go, you know what? There is something I need to go talk to somebody about, whether it's at home or on the job. I need to take that step. And that is probably one of the most important ways you can take care of your people, is just to demonstrate the right behaviors, and that the things that we tend to think are bad, if you will, aren't bad. They're actually good.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Oftentimes I think it's easier said than done, because in a profession like policing, there are a lot of type A personalities. There are a lot of egos that are involved. And by
This is
demonstrating,
where those parallels are, right?
yeah,
We wear different uniforms. You know, police officers take care of the home front. I was part of
yeah.
Team America World Police, right? We just go up, mess the whole world up. But yeah, type A's. I think there's type A's on both sides of that fence.
Yeah, so maybe this is, I think, again, another example of where coaching can be so critical. And
Yes.
really, I think if you have the growth mindset, if you understand that every day there is an opportunity to learn something new, it doesn't matter if you're a first day patrol officer or a chief of police. I always, felt uncomfortable, not about what I knew, but what I didn't know, and what was, where were the threats to the community, to the agency, that I'm not seeing, and how do I prepare myself for that? So, I like to read. I like to look at best practices. I like to look what other people are doing, and from a coaching perspective, and I think it's important to have a distinction between mentoring and coaching, because they're both really important. And what we're learning in law enforcement now, I think, in what the private sector and really the military kind of figured out a long time ago, is that, and not to say that we don't have good formal mentoring programs, good field training officer programs, but I can say this: there's a wide disparity in the level that you get in the policing profession, and sometimes the outside world doesn't necessarily understand the difference and the nuances between states, and then between your state and local, and in your local and your rural, your rural and your municipal policing. They all have similar, the mission is the same, when it comes to protecting life and property, but there's a lot of different ways in how that can get done. But the common theme is that there are best practices out there. There are people that have specialties and that have tremendous amount of experience that we can learn from. Mm-hmm. And just taking the approach that I don't know everything. And even if I do think I know everything in a certain area, it's good to challenge myself from time to time and seek out others that do something similar, so I can learn for myself what I know and what I don't know, affirm what I believe to be correct, or challenge my own beliefs about what I think are correct. And that has to really be an everyday thing. So when I think about Top Gun and Top Gun School itself, I see a lot of parallels there, in that, maybe explain to me what was the really the premise behind Top Gun, and then how did it evolve?
Yeah. So Top Gun is a teaching and learning opportunity, is what it is. What was interesting was when I walked in the first day, the commanding officer walks to the front of the room and says, "Welcome, gentlemen. We're here to teach the teachers. And it's going to be we're going to give you the latest tactics, the latest intel, the latest techniques, and it's your job to go back and teach everybody else." That's what Top Gun is. It's a teaching and coaching opportunity, which is interesting. You mentioned coaching, and I think at times we look at it and go, "Hey, I've been a pilot for so long. I'm a colonel. I've been in the Marine. I don't need a coach, right? I should know. I don't need to be coached at this level. I've been 10 years in the NFL. Why do I need to be coached?" Coaching, I look at as an opportunity to gain experiences without having to learn them on your own, is really what it is. That we are all biased by our own experience and by the lens that we've looked through, where we grew up, our parents, our schools, and everything else. And having a coach gives you an opportunity to go, "I never thought of it that way. I didn't understand. I didn't see it that way." It just gives you that opportunity to gain experience without having to do it. And the more coaching you get and the more different coaches you talk to, it just improves that overall understanding of particular situations. And that really is what Top Gun came around to be. In World War II, I think we had like a 12-to-1 kill ratio between us and our competitors. In By the time we got to Vietnam, it had gone down to like a 2 to 3 to 1 ratio. And what they were figuring out is that the pilots who were able to survive and execute at a high level had been in flying for a couple months in combat, and then they were good. And so they established Top Gun to take the senior pilots, share those experience with the pilots who had not gone yet, and improve their performance. So everything that was learned in combat was now being taught to people who had never been there, and now could share that within the organization. So that's the whole reason why Top Gun exists, is what are the best practices that are collectively gathered throughout the Navy and Marine Corps and Air Force and NATO services, and let's bring those together, come up with some techniques and procedures of how we can handle these situations, teach others to then go teach. I mean, that's what it means to wear the Top Gun patch. Is you are now you're literally a teacher in fighter attack aviation for the rest of your career. That's what you're supposed to be doing. And helping improve everyone around you to be as good or better than you are. And that can be challenging at times, but it's also hugely rewarding. So.
Yeah, so in law enforcement, we have a similar expression, but it's called train the trainer. And it's more of it's an economic model, I think, as much as anything else. When you have 18,000 different police departments, 80% of them are 20 officers or less, very small.
Right.
The larger agencies do have the opportunity to pull trainers from a much larger, more diverse working set. People with a lot of experience. Smaller agencies don't have the same opportunities, so that's oftentimes why you see some disparity in quite frankly, in the level of training and the level of professionalism. It doesn't mean that bigger departments are automatically better or are doing things better. It's really just a matter of sometimes attrition. Using your analogy there, if the first couple of months you're gaining that valuable experience, but you only get one shot at that when you're a pilot. And
I would assume the case could be the same in law enforcement, right? So that you only get one shot to do it right in a lot of situations. You don't, and it wasn't so much that I knew what I needed to do. It was, did my wingman, did my partner, are they going to do it right? I mean, I can't imagine being in a scenario where something happened, whether it's aviation or whether it's law enforcement, and something happened to my wingman or wingwoman because I didn't take the time to help train them with the knowledge I have. And oh, by the way, karma, it always comes back or whatever, right? How about this? I didn't train them. They didn't do their job right. And I'm the one who got shot. So
yeah.
It's one of those things that that was always a focus. How do I if I can't complete the mission, can they complete it? Or can they be an asset, or are they going to be a liability? And when you talk about those smaller units and having the time and money and resources and everything else, those who are trained and those who have the experience, it is absolutely imperative that you take those young kids, if you will, under your wings and you train them up and you spend the time. It just, from a chief standpoint, captain standpoint, I think it would make life a lot easier if they're not constantly screwing things up, right? And just go and
absolutely.
Stop making mistakes is not nobody shows up to work wanting to do a bad job. I never knew any Marine that showed up going, hey, I'm going to screw everything up today. And I'm assuming based on the makeup and attitude and cookie cutter that law enforcement comes from, I don't think anybody in law enforcement wants to show up and, end up on CNN. That's not the intention. So most of the times people make mistakes is they just didn't have the right training and the right experience. And that's our job, is to share those experiences and make sure that we are setting them up for success. Kind of goes back to the principle, right? Know your people and look out for their welfare. Number one thing. If you do that, a lot of the problems that I think we run into will take care of themselves. Now, obviously, the person on the other side of the law enforcing activity or the Marine Corps activity, they have a vote and how things go down. And that could be a whole nother discussion, but if we're always doing or trying to do or trained to do the right things, more often than not, the situation will come out successfully.
Yeah, that's the expression, right? The enemy always has a say.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that because I didn't want to say that bad guys
Right.
are always the enemy, but sometimes
Well,
they are, I guess.
I think maybe a better way to put that is, the enemy always has a say, but don't let the enemy be you. Don't be your own
Right.
worst.
Don't let the enemy dictate.
Right.
That's the thing. They can have a say, but I'm still dictating the situation.
And that's where, that the emotional control is so important, because a lot of times it is very difficult when you're, for a police officer who is engaged in very personal battles. I mean, being in homes where there's domestic violence, and people are mentally ill or they're suffering from addiction, and I would go so far as to say, no police officer shows up wanting to have a bad performance in their day, just like no person ever wakes up and wants to go to jail today. I just don't it's just, people are generally just doing the best that they can now. Life's choices and circumstances lead us to, that's why we need to have police departments. That's why we have to have a military, is because there are opportunists out there that will take advantage of others. But I want to go back real quick, because there's something you said in that, when you talk about your wingman and making sure that you're passing on that knowledge and training your wingman, because your life might someday be in their hands. And if you haven't trained them or prepared them properly, then, you're the one that can suffer the consequences of that. And there is a direct correlation in policing. And I wasn't planning on telling this story today, but I'll tell it anyway, because
You're a chief. You get to tell a story. This is your podcast.
Well, I've had the opportunity to go around and do different wellness trainings, and one of the things that I've been very passionate about in my career is providing people with the opportunity to understand what good physical health can do for their life overall, not just in terms of their performance at work, but how they can show up for their families when they're not at work, have the right amount of energy, the ability to have that resiliency, to recharge, to manage the stress, because the stress is not a bad thing, right? It's just a thing, and it's something that you have to learn how to manage and manage appropriately. But very, very early in my career, I went on a call, and we had a burglar that was working a certain part of our city, and he was very active. So we had been looking for him. We knew what part of the city he was working in, and it's busy, right? We go from call to call, and there's a night where a local auto dealership has an alarm. I'm the first one to show up. I get there. There's different types of alarm. This is, one that looks like it could be a legit alarm. Well, my backup officer shows up, and we head up. It's fenced in property. So I jump up on the fence. It's an 8-foot fence. I climb up over, I drop down, and I look, and my partner is standing on the other side of the fence. And he doesn't have the physical capacity to climb over the fence to come with me. So, I tell people, here's kind of one of these little dilemmas where, okay, well, I'm young, I'm confident, my ego drives a lot of decisions that I'm making at this point. And I convince myself right away, well, it's not going to be a big deal. Hey, I'll go check it. If there's a problem, I'll call you on the radio. And, we can already see me going down the wrong path. But at the time, I don't know that.
I'm going to call you on the radio for backup as you're stuck on the other side of the fence.
So, right. And, the short version, because I can tell long stories. The short version is, it turns out that everything was okay. It was a false alarm. We didn't have an active burglar. I came back and, I hopped back over the fence and, went on with my night. And, you get thinking about it, but could I have called for backup? Sure. I could have called for another officer to come out, but we're busy, right? So now you got to sit there and wait, and you're waiting for another officer to get there. And then in that time that you're waiting, the calls for service don't stop coming in. So someone else is going to have to start managing and handling calls that are coming in that maybe you could have otherwise gotten if you go and handle your call.
Now on TV, they show you just take the police cruiser and you just drive it through the fence, right? And
yeah.
First, that's not part of the.
Well, maybe if I would have
Kind
gotten
of like
myself
putting tone on somebody to wake them up, right?
Yeah. Well, if I'd have gotten into a scrum, maybe that would have been maybe that would have been my partner's choice. But in any case, I got it kind of struck me. I thought a lot about that, and I'm like, number one, if let's just say I do encounter this burglar, and let's just say he's armed, or I get into a fight, or God forbid I wind up getting shot or getting injured, whose fault is that? It would be easy real quick to try to shift blame back on the guy that can't hop the fence. And a lot of police officers will go there immediately, right? If you're young and you're in shape and you're taking care of yourself, you're, come on, man, you got to get in the gym with me. You got to do these things. And, I would be lying if I didn't say that was, the young me. That was a lot of the thoughts that I had. But, in the end, I'm accountable for myself and my own actions. So if I make the choice to go clear that building by myself, that's nobody else's fault but mine, because I'm making the choice. Now, are there other influences that I have to account for? Sure. And so my point when I go and I talk about wellness initiatives and why it's so important is because, to me, there are things far worse than death. If I go into that building, I encounter a burglar and I get shot and killed, you know what? That's obviously not the outcome I'm looking for. But okay, I died doing what I love, trying to make a difference. But for the person that's standing on the outside of that fence, who now has to live with the fact that another officer got injured because of my inability to help them in a moment when they needed me to help them. Like, right. I think any police officer recognizes that you really need to be able to climb a 6 foot, 8 foot fence. And if you can't, that should be, you shouldn't beat yourself up over it, but there needs to be some true, really some good reflection there. So, well, why can't I? And what's preventing me from taking, or making the opportunity to ensure that I can do that. And that applies to a lot of things, because now the officer has to live with that, the understanding that I could have done something to help, and I failed because I failed to prepare, and that, that goes back to, the whole saying about planning, failure to plan is, planning to fail. And right. So I say that,
Patrick, I got a quick question. In your department at that time, in that scenario, was there, for lack of a better term, we'll just call it an SOP, that you go in alone, you don't go in alone, you go in alone when you think, someone's, life's in danger, or if it's just, whether things like that, or is it just a total judgment call that's based on your own experience and knowledge, which we could circle back to the coaching, yep. Right? The coaching and taking care of your people, whether it's you do it professionally or you just do it within the department. I mean, was there some established procedure, or? So
there's no policy that says a person, is prohibited from clearing a building or searching by themselves, but there is a training practice that we train officers not to do that.
Right.
And that it's always going to be subjective, because every situation is. So if it's a windy night, and this is, you typically get a lot of building alarms on windy nights, because alarms, especially back then, they're not nearly as as good as they are now, but a door or a window left open, a lot of reasons why you can get a false alarm, and that goes back to complacency kills, because you get a lot of these, and it's easy to fall into the assumption that, well, it's just another false alarm, and I hop the fence, I climb around, and I assume that there's no threat there, and again, that's why I say it's ultimately on me.
It's interesting you mentioned complacency kills. There's a picture. I put in one of my articles on LinkedIn, but it was outside of, I believe it was Camp Fallujah. You're there at Ramadi, and it was a big sign that when they drove out the gate, that's exactly what it said. Because, even in that scenario, and I wasn't on the ground, but based on my training, my assumption is you do the same patrol, you do the same routes, you do the same thing. Nothing's happened yesterday, the day before that, last week, last month. Why are we here? What are we doing? And all of a sudden they decide to do something, and you're complacent and you're looking at the trees or something else instead of checking your alleyways that you're supposed to be doing. So it's interesting. It's true in aviation too. Believe it or not, flying the F-18, it was the greatest job I think I could ever have wished for or wanted, but it can become routine. It starts the same way, it taxis the same way, it takes off the same way, the missions start looking the same. It just, you get to the point where, it just becomes very routine, or it can be. And it's interesting, there are two peaks where we have our highest mishap rates. It's pilots with less than 500 hours, which is about 2 to 3 years. They're brand new, they're lots of training, they're learning everything. Then it goes down, and it stays down until you hit the 2,000 to 2,500 mark. It pops up again. It's not as high as new, but it does go up. And those are your senior pilots. And they attributed that because those are the people that have become complacent. And I have, as a senior pilot, one situation I completely put myself into, and the poor kid in my back seat that I was supposedly teaching because I was complacent, yada, 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 we'll just do this. We're going to do a loop, and next thing I know, I departed the aircraft over a 14,000 foot mountain, which is not a good place to be because it takes some time to recover the aircraft. So if anything that, the senior leadership can do is just not allow their teams to become complacent, whether it's training, whether it's just talking, whatever you can do, or just messaging that over and over again is hugely, hugely important, because I think that's where mistakes happen, right? And even well-intentioned mistakes. We're not trying to do the wrong thing, but we've become complacent and our heart rate's down a little bit, and something happens and we have a synapse lapse, and then that next thing you know, things aren't good. So,
well, yeah, and that's maybe that's a perfect segue for one of the other things that I wanted to chat about. And so, if you get complacent and you are presented with a threat, and a moment's hesitation or the wrong decision can lead to a calamity of errors, and it can lead you down a dark road, and it can happen very quickly. And some of those things are unrecoverable. Just depends on what the situation is. So I know we talked about, pilots have checklists, and checklists can help, I think, ensure that human error is removed from a process, or that we skip over something. But we can use this opportunity to talk about a fellow Boilermaker, Captain Sullenberger, who successfully ditched an aircraft in water, right, and saved every one of his.
Oh, when I heard that, I thought U.S. Airways is done. They just killed everybody on the airplane. And then when I heard later on, like an hour later, everybody got off, I'm like, okay, what?
That's amazing. So I will say, this is where I wanted to come back with one of my stories, because on one of those mission support runs I was on, we were flying C-141s. I was not flying. I was just part of the crew. But I remember one of the engineers, he just, he was going through the pre-flight brief with me, and he was telling me where the flotation devices were, kind of like you would get in a in a commercial aircraft. But he said, don't worry about it. He's like, if we crash in the ocean, no one has ever successfully ditched an aircraft in the ocean, so don't worry about it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's comforting.
Yeah.
But now we see that now maybe the Hudson is a little bit different than out in the ocean. I don't you're not getting 10, 12-foot waves that you're trying to land on. But
Right.
So what do you think, when you talk about Captain Sullenberger, and for those that may not, I'm sure everyone knows what we're referring to, is they got hit with a bird strike, took out, I think it took out all their engines. So
yeah, took out both engines.
And he was able to, what do you think was the process that he went through that led to this successful outcome?
It goes back to what we almost started this whole conversation with, was having that routine, right? This is what I do every single time. It's funny you mentioned getting on an airplane. So, just based on my training and experience and, and thought process, I get on an airplane. When I sit down, I count rows. And I think that comes from being in the dunker with the blindfolds on, the helicopter dunker in the Marine Corps, right? In the Navy, they drop you in a pool, it flips upside down, you got to find the window and crawl out with goggles on that are painted black so you can't see. So I get on an airplane, I count rows, front, back. What are my exits? I'm literally, I think, the only person that picks up the card. My wife was like, don't touch that. It's got germs on. I'm like, no one else looks at this. It's probably the cleanest card, probably the cleanest surface in this whole airplane. I look at it real quick. Okay, how would I open this door? And I kind of, just for a second, I close my eyes and visualize where I would put my hands. And then I reach, I do now, I didn't before Sullenberg, but I reach under and I kind of tap and I go, yep, okay, there's my life jacket. And then I go back to read the magazine and I don't pay attention to the safety brief, right? Because everything they're going to tell me, I know. Okay, rough air is turbulent. Yeah. But I do that every single time, just because it's a routine. Because my thought is the most dangerous part of being an airliner is takeoff and landing. And God forbid, I would hate to burn up or die inside of an airplane because I couldn't get to an exit and get it open. And I look at the people around me and I'm like, not going to make it, not going to make it, not going to make it. I'm literally going to sit here, let all those bodies fall on each other, and then I'm going to go. So in Sullenberg's standpoint, he was there were two things that were in his favor. He was a former Air Force fighter pilot. So I think that helped in terms of how he handled it, or handled the emergency, just like Tammy Jo Schultz, the Southwest pilot who had the engine blowout, and then unfortunately the woman got sucked halfway out the airplane. And if you listen to both of their audio tapes, do yourself a favor, Google or YouTube those audio tapes. Just listen to Sullenberg and Tammy Jo Schultz's audio tapes. They sound like they just rolled up to McDonald's and ordered a number 3 with a Diet Coke, large fries, extra ketchup. Really. They were both very calm, cool, and collective. In Sullenberg's case, he was also a glider pilot, so maybe that helped out because the airplane was essentially a glider at that point. But it went back to routine training, being prepared, and I guarantee you he approached every flight the way he did in the military, which was to sit there and go, okay, here's the brief, this is what we're doing, and get himself in the mindset, right? I think that paid huge dividends in my career, just in terms of where I was able to go, because I did the same things, whether I was going on a mission where I was leading 8 airplanes or just going on a routine maintenance flight to see if the airplane was fixed properly. I approached it the same way every single time. I did the exact same things, the exact same briefs, even if I was briefing myself, because I didn't have anybody else to talk to. I would go through the checklist and look at it and go, what's the weather? What are my diverts? What's going on here? Just if you do that every single time, it sets you up for success, right? I'm going to assume as a lay person that when you pull somebody over, there's probably a checklist of things that you think about or what you ought to do as you're approaching the car, what you're looking for, maybe movements inside, probably even profiling the vehicle, right? To try to determine what might be the intentions, how they're. My other thought is are there times that you pull somebody over and you just kind of get out and walk up, right? Yep. And then back to now something happens and you're behind the power curve. And as you said earlier, the enemy, the suspect, the threat, whoever, the other person has a vote in that, but you can't let them dictate the situation. And you do that by, okay, all right, I just pulled them over before I literally take the extra 5 seconds, because they're not going to go anywhere if they pulled over, right? You got 5 seconds to mentally, I think, go through your checklist. These are things I'm looking for. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to say. This is how I'm going to approach. Okay, now I get out of the car, right? And I may be way off base, but I think just those little mental checklists, falling back on your training, not allowing yourself to be complacent, sticking to your routines, both mentally and physically, all pay into having a successful career that is great and has something you can look back on when you're, in the old folks' home dribbling on yourself and go, you know what? That was cool. I had a great life and I got no regrets. But if you don't do that, if you allow yourself to be complacent, you don't use the checklist we use, and I'm drawing it on a little bit, but I was always told as a junior pilot, the checklists that we use are written in blood. The reason why they're there is someone else messed it up or got caught up in a situation, and this is the fix. This is how you prevent or negate or at least mitigate, because you can't stop everything, right? But if you can at least mitigate and keep yourself ahead of the situation. It's a difference between responding and reacting. If you're reacting to a situation, you're already behind. If you're responding, you're still driving the fight. And that's the whole key. That's the whole key to flying jets in the military, whether it's combat or it's just an emergency. And I believe that's probably true in law enforcement, right? I don't hear anybody, as a layperson, I don't hear officers reacting to a situation, right? What the news says is that they respond to a situation, which means, to me, they're going and they're driving the show.
Yeah, responding and reacting, and it is it's the mindset that wins. Having the winning mindset, and that begins with preparation. And you said that so eloquently. I don't even know that I want to say anything else, because I think it's maybe a perfect way to end the podcast. Because I knew it's going to happen. We're way over our time already, but I think the point. A couple of points there. One, there is a fantastic book that talks about surviving disasters. I read it years ago, and one of the stories that they lay out in that book is how to survive an airplane crash. And what you just described is the way to do it. So you just picked up on something. You probably do it naturally just because of the training that you have. But when a cabin fills with smoke, you're not going to be able to see the exits, or you may not be able to see them, or if you're disoriented. So you have to, just that one simple thing is the number one thing that leads to survival in a survivable crash. Not all crashes are survivable, but yeah, and you're right. It is easy to look around and say, yep, not going to make it. I even have plans, and I'm so glad you said that, because now I don't feel so weird. Where I am.
I know how many seats I got to crawl over.
Absolutely.
I've thought of that. If this person can't get out, and I can't help them, they've just completely lost it and they're flailing. I can't get their seatbelt. I can't drag them out of the airplane. I'm like, all right, fine. Yeah. Well, I got to crawl over 6 seats, and then the latch is there, and then I'm out.
I look for kids, who might need some help, who should have known better and be ready to help themselves. And then I've even mapped it out. Like, if you got like a big guy that it's not going to be, he's going to be in your way. How am I going to get around him? So that's all right. I'm glad to hear that. So I'll move it on. But I think in terms again of Captain Sullenberger and his success, a lot of people look at an incident like that and they say, wow, he did such a great job. That was amazing, which is all true. But if you look at that in the moment and say he successfully navigated that in the moment, all true, but his success in the moment really was predicated on his training, his experience, his routine, his refusal to be complacent, because that's
his preparation, his mindset. Funny story. I was getting a haircut on base, talking to the barber, and I can't remember what discussion was, but I said, yeah, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And the barber sits there and he goes, Marines don't get lucky. They make their own luck. And I started thinking about that. And to Summerberg's point, people get lucky because they put themselves in the situation to be lucky, right? Oh, that was unlucky that happened. Well, it's unlucky because they weren't prepared. Whenever somebody says, oh, that person got lucky, there's a lot of work that went behind having the capability to be in the position to be lucky in terms of how you prepared, what you did, what you thought of. I mean, even if it's football season, right? So you see the receiver make the ridiculous one-handed catch. Who's that guy for Cincinnati? Oh, I don't know. We'll just call Tyreek Hill from the Chiefs, right? Somebody makes some ridiculous catch, but then you see on NFL Network before the game, they're catching tennis balls one-handed. Here, over their shoulder and everything else. And then they go make this amazing, oh, look how lucky that catch was. It wasn't lucky. There were years almost of preparation and dedication and routine and adherence to a professional and personal routine to make sure that when that moment arrived, they could respond and be in the correct position. And I think that's one thing in Sullenberg's case. That's why he, quote unquote, got lucky and landed the airplane and everybody survived. It wasn't luck. It was all that preparation. And it was based on what he'd been taught and the leaders before him and those coaches that he had or teachers that took care of him and taking advantage of things, going to conferences or going to training, things like TaserCon coming up. And I'll throw the pitch there. If you constantly are preparing yourself, you will be lucky. If you're not, you'll be the one that people go, well, that was just unlucky, right?
Yeah.
If a meteorite hits your car, that's unlucky. Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty
unlucky. That one I'm going to call unlucky. But other than that, I think a lot of things in this world that we call unlucky or lucky or oh, that person got unlucky because they fell off the cliff taking a selfie. No, they climbed over the rope, ignored the sign that says stay on this side of the rope, backed up too far, got too involved with their own selfie, and then fell. That wasn't unlucky. That was stupidity. So
that's Darwin at work.
Yeah, it's Darwin at work. But, on the flip side, if you do the right things, you do the right training from a leadership perspective, you take care of your people, then you won't have an unlucky career. You'll just have a really good one, a nice one. Things will work out well, and you'll do your job and make a difference.
Well, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. That's always that's been my favorite definition.
I should have just said that. We could have saved 5 minutes of the podcast.
It was more fun the way you said it. And the other, when you go back to the talk, right? When the calm voice on the radio, that's something that is taught in law enforcement as well. And quite frankly, the way that it was taught to me and the way that I wound up as a training officer teaching others was always try to have the voice of an airline pilot, because there's such a lot to be learned from it. In that, if you can remain calm in the face of extreme stress, then it also instills a sense of calmness in others. If you panic, you'll create panic in others, and that calm voice can actually help you calm yourself down and really start working the problem rather than having the problem work you. So what I like to was an expression of my own was, and I'm sure I picked it up somewhere, but I call it the doom loop. If you get excited, start yelling, that what's happening inside your body, the physiological response to stress, that sympathetic nervous system, response, it's leading to nothing but trouble. And then once you get into that doom loop, it's hard to get out, and a mistake leads to mistake, and you're going to stay in that until someone can, something or someone pulls you out of it. So having a calm voice on the air, even when you hear someone panicking, in policing, you hear it all the time on the radio, "Foot pursuit," or "shots fired." You can hear everything get really excited. But one thing that would always bring a level of calm is like when you have that person out there that just gets on the radio and immediately just starts saying the right things at the right tone, bringing everybody down. But, again, that comes back down to, you got to practice it. It's not something that necessarily will come naturally to most people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Voice inflection is a huge deal. I mean, it is in the airplane. It is from a forward air controller to an airplane, and I'm assuming it is in policing as well. I mean, we use voice inflection to transmit or to, elevate the seriousness of a situation. But the second, like you said, you start screeching, all bets are off. People aren't understanding. They get all wrapped up, and mistakes start getting made. So, voice inflection is good. Really, I had 3 levels: the calm one, the "hey, I need some help," and the kind of the "oh crap" one. But the "oh crap" one can't be screeching, because the second you hit screeching tone, now the people showing up who are there to support you, all they've heard is someone screeching, so they are just really triggered, no pun intended, to a scenario or a situation, right? And they're not gaining they're not synthesizing or processing the information you're transmitting. All they're hearing is screeching and, "oh my God, I gotta get there real quick." And now they may put themselves in an extreme situation too, because they arrive in that mindset or that emotional state. So,
all right. Well, there's so many other things I'd like to talk about, but we'll end it here. That's a great segue. I think the overarching lesson here is, if you're going to be an idiot, it's on you. If you should have known better and should have prepared better, you can't expect someone to always be there to bail you out. So make sure you're preparing yourself. Make sure we can use this as maybe, the overall theme is have a checklist, know what you're preparing for, stick to it, have the discipline to stick to it. And, from a leadership perspective, make sure that you're providing your agency with the opportunities to prepare and to build, and so they can go out and they can do the best that they can, not just for themselves, but for their shifts, for their departments, which ultimately is going to lead to safer communities. Just always, be willing to grind, always be willing to seek out, new training, be a lifelong learner, and take the lessons of Patrick Houlahan, Top Gun pilot here to heart.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Patrick, for the time. I thank you for the opportunity too. I appreciate being able to talk to the men and women out there and to all your listeners. So hopefully you can pull something from this, and we'll cover a lot more. Maybe we should do this again.
Absolutely.
Hopefully I get invited back, and then being able to present and lead a couple workshops at TaserCon. I'm really excited about doing that and seeing what I can teach. I mean, that's my whole goal, is to teach and leave something behind. Flying jets was cool. It's a good story. It's a good hook, but what can I communicate that can really help people out? And in this case, men and women who are protecting me every night while I'm sleeping in my bed. So whatever I can do, I'm happy to do it.
Well, happy to be your wingman, and really, really appreciate you spending the time sharing your lessons. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person out at TaserCon and along the road. So
got it. Stay out of the jet wash.
Well, all right.
That
I'll
might
do
be
my
new
best.
ending for all my presentations. Stay out of the jet wash.
All right. Well, we'll talk about my sport parachute jumping career when I was in college at some other time.
Why would you jump out of a perfectly good airplane?
Yeah. Yeah.
From by a very competent pilot.
It's not the dumbest thing I've ever done. All right, folks.
Alex.
Thanks for listening to the Coptimizer podcast. It's been awesome to have our guest Patrick Houlahan on. And until next time, stay out of the jet wash.
Thank you.
Going to axoncoaching.com. Check us out and contact us today. Until our next episode, I'm 1042.